Welcome back to our studios here in Lahore. I'm Hamza Amjad, and let's start with Iran, which says it seized a foreign tanker and detained 12 of its crew in the Gulf. The Iranian Revolutionary Guards alleged that the vessel was smuggling 1 million litres of fuel. The announcement comes 2 days after Iran said it rescued a foreign tanker after receiving a distress call. State media say the tanker was seized on Sunday south of Larak Island in the Strait of Hormuz. Tensions in the Gulf are high since Britain's recent seizure of an Iranian oil tanker alleging it was carrying oil to Syria. In a related development, the US says its officials will discuss maritime security around the Strait of Hormuz with the Washington Diplomatic Corps on Friday. This comes after the Pentagon said it was building a coalition to police the Gulf to protect the interests of its allies. Now, the US State Department says that the security of vessels and freedom of navigation in the Gulf is a global challenge. It says a multinational effort is needed to address the issue. Meanwhile, Britain's Defence Ministry says it is rightly concerned about protecting its goods in the Strait of Hormuz. Moving on to Russia, which has asked the US to withdraw nuclear weapons deployed outside its territory. A document accidentally published by a NATO-affiliated body revealed 6 European states house American weapons. The now deleted document says US nuclear weapons are being stored in Belgium, Germany, Italy, the Netherlands and Turkey. Russia's permanent representative in Vienna, Mikhail Ulyanov, says Moscow places its nuclear weapons exclusively on its own territory. The American director of the Arms Control Association, Kingston Reef, says the presence of US nuclear weapons in Europe is not a surprise. Reef says it has long been a fairly open secret. Meanwhile, NATO has warned Russia of consequences if it does not return to complying with the INF Treaty by August the 2nd. Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said time is running out to save the INF Treaty. The US and the Soviet Union signed the agreement in 1987 to ban short and medium-range missiles. Stoltenberg said Russia's decision to develop new weapons is a clear violation of the Arms Accord. The US announced it would suspend its obligations under the treaty in February, accusing Russia of breaching its terms. Russia denies the allegations but suspended its part in the treaty last month after presenting proof that the US was working on long-range missiles. Moving on, Turkey has asked the US to reverse its decision to stop the F-35 fighter jet sales to Ankara. Its foreign ministry says the illegitimate move can harm strategic ties between the two NATO allies. Now, the ministry asked the US to honor its friendship with Turkey with actions instead of rhetoric. Earlier, US President Donald Trump said he will stop the sales of the advanced warplanes to Ankara over its purchase of the Russian S-400s. Trump said Turkey can't have both American and Russian equipment. Now, Ankara began receiving the missile defense system last week, despite US warnings. In Turkey, 15 people have been killed as a minibus carrying migrants overturned in the eastern province of Van. Officials say 28 others were wounded in the accident. Women and children are among the victims of the crash, which happened near the border with Iran. And in Japan, 33 people have been killed in a suspected arson attack at an animation studio in Kyoto. The local fire department says 35 people were injured, with 10 sustaining life-threatening injuries. Police have arrested a 41-year-old man who they believe poured gasoline in different parts of the building. He was also injured in the fire and has been taken to a hospital. And in the US Congress, lawmakers have approved 3 resolutions blocking President Donald Trump's planned sale of weapons to Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. 2 of the resolutions were passed with 238 votes, while a third was approved with 237. Trump, who sought good relations with Riyadh, has pledged to veto the move. Overturning a presidential veto requires a 2/3 majority in both the House and Senate. Trump had announced plans to sell missiles and other weapons worth $8 billion to Saudi Arabia, the UAE and Jordan. Let's go now to Syria, where rebel coalition claims Moscow has deployed special ground forces in the country's northwest to seize opposition strongholds. In an interview, they said no Russian ground forces had fought alongside the government on the front line until now. The coalition claims that the deployment came only after Syrian troops were unable to make any significant headway. Government forces regained the Hamamiyat hilltop from rebels last week after the intervention and successful advance of allied troops. War monitors say government forces have captured over 70 houses in Ghouta, a town in southwestern Syria. The UN says over 300,000 civilians fled the battle after dozens of villages and towns came under attack. And now let's head to Ukraine, which has confirmed its commitment to an indefinite ceasefire in Donbass starting from July the 21st. The eastern Donbass border region has been scarred with cross-border fighting, and is seen as a flashpoint that could trigger war. The ceasefire has been approved by the Trilateral Contact Group, brokering peace for East Ukraine. Government spokesperson Daria Oliver says the contract group has confirmed the implementation of the Minsk agreements. Oliver said the sides have pledged to provide secure access for the OSCE Special Monitoring Mission. Earlier, OSCE Special Representative Martin Sajdik said the contact group had negotiated the terms of an indefinite ceasefire. Well, the EU chief's Brexit negotiator has warned Britain against leaving the bloc without a deal. Michel Barnier says the UK will have to face the consequences if it opts for a no-deal Brexit. More in this report.
So important.
In an interview, Barnier said Britain was underestimating the possibility of a no-deal Brexit by calling it an unimpressive threat. Barnier said he was never told during Brexit talks Prime Minister Theresa May or her ministers might opt for no deal. The EU's chief said May's 3 times rejected deal was the only way to leave the EU in an orderly manner.
The legal answers to each and every point of uncertainty created by the Brexit. That is the point. That is why this document is the only way to leave the EU in an orderly manner.
Meanwhile, Foreign Secretary Jeremy Hunt has warned of a hardened British attitude if the EU chose not to renegotiate the deal.
Moving on, Canadian and European Union leaders are negotiating to expand their comprehensive economic and trade agreements. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and EU Council President Donald Tusk said they will strengthen their bilateral relationship. More in this report.
Canadian and EU leaders are negotiating to expand their comprehensive economic and trade agreement. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and EU Council President Donald Tusk said they will strengthen their bilateral relationship. In a meeting with Trudeau on the sidelines of the Canada-EU summit, Tusk called Ottawa the EU's closest transatlantic partner. Canada's Prime Minister said its cooperation with Brussels is an example for the world.
President Tusk has been a good friend, a strong ally, and an extraordinarily powerful representative for Europeans who believe that working together and achieving great things only happens if we stay open and confident.
The trade pact between Europe and Canada went into effect in mid-2017 and has so far been ratified by 13 of the 28 EU states. The CETA removes tariffs on nearly all goods and services between Canada and Europe. Since the accord was signed, EU exports to Canada have risen 15%.
Well, South America's Mercosur bloc has met in Argentina to fast-track the deal it signed with the EU. The presidents of Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay and Uruguay convened in Santa Fe less than a month after the agreement. Brazil assumed presidency of the trade bloc from Argentina during the meeting. Members and the EU agreed to eliminate nearly all tariffs on two-way trade. The arrangement marks a rare win for free trade amid rising global protectionism. However, it still needs to be ratified by the multiple national parliaments involved. The World Health Organization says the battle for Libya's capital has killed over 1,000 people and injured 50,000 others. In a statement, the UN said the fight for Tripoli has displaced over 120,000 people. The country fell into crisis after Eastern forces loyal to Khalifa Haftar launched an offensive on Tripoli in early April. In addition to the capital, the war has also destroyed entire neighborhoods in places such as Benghazi. Now in Uganda, Ebola experts have launched an awareness campaign following a global Ebola emergency declared by the United Nations. This comes after an infected Congolese fisherwoman died after visiting the Ugandan town of Mpondwe. The WHO says nearly 600 others are believed to have contracted the infection. They have been listed for Ebola vaccination. Last month, 3 people died from the fatal disease in Uganda. Over 1,000 have fallen victim to Ebola in Congo over the last 12 months.
If you don't know, you find somebody just dead instantly and you don't know what the person died of, it's not good for you to bury that person yourself. Go to the health facility, they will help you out, come with somebody trained to bury the person, and they will bury the person instead of you contracting the disease from there.
Since the outbreak last year, Ebola has continued to spread with an average of 10 to 15 cases per day in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And moving on, Egypt has begun restoring King Tutankhamun's golden coffin for the first time. The boy king's tomb was discovered a century ago. The Antiquities Ministry said in a statement that the coffin is damaged at multiple points. Restoration and maintenance of the coffin will take 8 months. The coffin was transferred from the tomb to the Grand Museum near Cairo a few days ago. It was the only coffin left in the tomb after the king's other 2 caskets were moved to the Cairo Museum in 1922. King Tutankhamun's collection will be put on display at the Grand Egyptian Museum in 2020. Well, a family in Cuba makes musical instruments from antique furniture found in demolition sites or in the rubbish. These instruments are then sold on to schools. More in this report.
Recently, Cuba has introduced traditional music courses to its syllabus, but the country doesn't have the resources to produce musical instruments on its own. So, in an unprecedented move, the government has made an agreement with the Guayabo Luthiers.
Up until now, we have made some 550 instruments. Our instruments are in every school in the country.
It's difficult for private artisans to purchase wood suitable for the musical instruments. But the Guayabo artisans have found a way around this obstacle. They make instruments using raw materials. The instruments are made in the courtyard of the family's house on the outskirts of Havana.
The luthiers in the world are virtually all solitary wolves working on their own. In our case, it's part of family inheritance, like it usually is around the world. But we have become a group within the family who are dedicated to making musical instruments. These musical instruments reach schools through a socio-cultural project.
Everywhere around the world, luthiers are solitary workers, but in Cuba, it's a family business.
Well, stunning holographic images have brought the Queen Victoria's Palace to life in a UK summer exhibition. The show marking the Queen's 200th birthday features her throne, ball gown and paintings. More in this report.
Britain's Queen Elizabeth visited the show dedicated to her great-great-grandmother. It uses cutting-edge technology to recreate Buckingham Palace in its 19th century glory. The display reveals how Victoria revolutionized the monarchy. She was the longest-serving sovereign until 2015, when Elizabeth, 93, overtook her. Co-curator Lucy Peter says the deceased queen deserves the credit for what the palace is today.
exhibition has been organised to mark the 200th anniversary of Queen Victoria's birth, and it really tells a story of how Queen Victoria transformed Buckingham Palace from an unloved and unlived-in royal residence into the building we know today.
The Buckingham Palace exhibition opens on July the 20th and runs until the end of September.
Well, the sun is back out here in Lahore, but let's take a look at the weather around the globe. Well, that was all from me from the News Bulletin at the moment, but do stay tuned to Indus News for further updates. And as always, thanks for watching.